All right, good morning on what's in the Washington, D.C. area, a sunny and beautiful Saturday morning. It's a great start to a holiday weekend. Welcome to the September 2022 edition of Talking Baseball presented by the Bob David SABR chapter. And start off with a few announcements. This is our first meeting after a very successful SABR 50 conference in Baltimore. Over 500 people attended, and I was told about 60 or so of those were Bob David's members. So kudos to chapter members that showed up. I think we all had a great time. As I mentioned previously, there was a general sense of there's always excitement at these meetings, but there was even more so because it was the first in-person meeting in 3 years, and I think people were really happy to get back together, and you know, we're all doing the Zoom stuff virtual for years. It was nice to get back in person. Our next Talking Baseball meeting will be on Saturday, October 1st at 9 a.m. with a guest speaker to be announced soon. I did spend a lot of time at the SABR conference lining up authors for future meetings, and I think these will be exciting and interesting authors, so stay tuned for what's coming down the road. If you have questions for today's speaker, please put them into the chat box and we'll get them at the appropriate time. Now, let's get to today's guest. Today's speaker is longtime SABR member Lawrence Knorr. Lawrence is a resident of Pennsylvania and a graduate of Penn State University. Besides a long career in information technology, Lawrence is the founder and CEO of Sunbury Press, located in Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania, outside of Carlisle. Lawrence is the author or co-author of over 30 books, many focusing on the people and history of Pennsylvania. So this 2018 biography of Gettysburg Eddie fits squarely in his wheelhouse. I met Lawrence in Baltimore at the recent SABR 50 conference, and he graciously agreed to speak with us this morning. So welcome, Lawrence. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Doing very well. I just want to second that about SABR 50. It was a great time. Lots of energy there. Met lots of wonderful people, and the conversations we were having were amazing. Just the detail we could go into about baseball history. So I'm a huge fan, and yeah, just loved every minute of it. And I was in the vendor room almost the whole time and sold a lot of books and had a lot of conversations. So those of you who were there and purchased from us, thank you again, and looking forward to Chicago next year.
Yeah, I should mention this is the book that we're talking about today, and I think you sold more than a few copies of these, didn't you?
That was actually our bestseller, and that wasn't me pushing it. I guess a lot of people have interest in the dead ball era. And I think the bright red cover background helps as well. And it also helps that there was another book recently published about Eddie Plank. There might have been a little confusion, so I'll explain that as we get into this. But I'm happy to have sold that many copies, whether people were confused or not.
Okay, sounds great. So why don't you take it away and get started here?
All right. All right, everything good on your end?
It is, thank you.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for having me today. The topic today is going to be Gettysburg Eddie Plank. And I know there's a little bit about me in the intro. I won't add on to that. I think all those things were already said. So a little bit about Sunbury Press, the publishing company, now in our 18th year. We publish over 100 titles a year. Quite a few of those are baseball books, maybe 5 to 10. So about 5 to 10% of our offering is baseball history. We now have over 1,000 titles, over 500 authors under management, 15 imprints, books sold worldwide. So we used to be a small independent press. People are now calling us a medium-sized independent press, whatever that means. And we are a traditional trade publisher. We pay royalties to our authors, and we only make money by selling books. So that's the Sunbury Press commercial. If any of you are writing baseball books, you're looking for a publisher, I'd be happy to take a look at it. So Eddie Plank, A little bit about Eddie Plank, sort of his vitals as we get into this. I'm sure some of you know a bit about Eddie Plank. Maybe some of you know a lot about Eddie Plank, but born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in 1875. And when you think about that, 12 years after the battle, and it was a different world from the 20th century where he later becomes a baseball star. You have the country becoming very serious, the Gilded Era starting, industries growing, big things for railroads and coal. And as he grows up, of course, we get into all the new technologies and consumer culture that happens later on. Eddie didn't live very long. He lived 51 years. He died in 1926. And his major league career, 1901 to 1917, he, of course, wins over 300 games. And he's the answer to the trivia question, who's the winningest left-hander in Philadelphia history? Many people will guess Steve Carlton and completely forget Eddie Plank. Flash his stats up here. I don't know how big your screens are. This is a bit of an eye chart, but if you can see it, I think it's remarkable to note, just go down the ERAs in the middle of the screen or look at the win totals. I know these aren't statistics that are as valued today as they had been historically, but he was a very, very consistent pitcher. He never won 30 games, but he often won 15 or more, and many times won over 20. Most of his career with the Philadelphia Athletics, of course. And the ERA is low because it's the dead ball era. He was of Pennsylvania Dutch ancestry, born into a farming family. He was a local hero. Of course, a lot of your major league players at the local level are very noteworthy. Even the ones that don't become famous were still probably the best players on their teams. He signed with the Philadelphia Athletics and Connie Mack. He completely avoided playing minor league baseball. He was a fairly good hitting pitcher, and he, in his youth, like many players, was a lot more than a pitcher. He did play most of his career in the American League, and he pitched on some of the greatest teams in American League history. So why write a book about Eddie Plank? Well, I wrote a book about Carl Scheib, the youngest player in baseball history when he came up in 1942. And he's still the youngest player in American League history. And so I wrote that book and learned that Chief Bender was Carl Scheib's pitching coach. And I thought, well, I ought to write a book about Chief Bender. And come to find out that Chief Bender already had a bunch of books written about him. So as I was looking at Bender's career, I ran into Eddie Plank, and I thought, well, Eddie Plank's right down the road in Gettysburg. And I live on the west shore of Harrisburg. Gettysburg is only about 30 minutes away. And I saw at the time in 2018 or 2017, 2018, that there was no full-length biography ever written about Eddie Plank. So I started working on it. And it was published in 2018 and was nominated for a Larry Ritter Award. Along the way, I got to know Eddie Plank III, the grandson of the baseball player. And that gave me a lot of inroads into some family history and photographs and things. I do want to say that David Heller did publish a book last year called Gettysburg Eddie Plank, and I think that won the Larry Ritter Award. I will say that was published by McFarland. We sat next to them at the conference, and they only had a couple copies of that book. So they gave me one and I gave them one of mine, and we were comparing them, and mine's a little thicker. It doesn't mean it's any better. I actually think Heller does a better job of condensing it, and he's a better writer. I say that honestly. I know that my goal with this book was to, because there never had been a biography written, to try to include as much as I possibly could. So a lot to it, and I'm going to get right into a bit of what you'd find in the book and a little bit about Eddie Plank. So the Battle of Gettysburg happens in 1863 in July. Lots of people know about that, but what you might not know is that the Plank farm, the grandfather's farm, was west of Willoughby Run, which is a creek on the west of Gettysburg, just outside of town. And it was a very unfortunate spot to be on July 1st, 1863, because the Confederates were advancing from the west and coming right across the Chambersburg Road and right across Willoughby Run. So the farm was inundated by Confederates on that day. The family had fled east before the battle, and they left their farm to the Confederates. The farm ended up a field hospital. Every sheet, every curtain, anything of cloth was used for bandages. All the animals were used for food. All the fence posts, everything was used for firewood. So it was really sort of picked apart and quite a traumatic experience for the Plank family. Now, in later years, the Planks would go out to the old grandfather's farm and they would find all kinds of artifacts. And the Plank family has quite a collection of cannonball or different kind of parrot gun balls and musket and mini balls and so on and so forth, maybe belt buckles, things like that. So after the Battle of Gettysburg and that traumatic experience, the family moves north of town and along the old Harrisburg Pike. So a different farm where Eddie Plank grows up. And if you ever want to go back in time and try to experience what was it like in the late 1800s, you can do this here. If you find the Plank farm, and next to it is a lane that goes up to the Good Intent School. So if you look on a map, if you Google Good Intent and in Adams County, you'll find the spot. The upper left picture is the old one-room schoolhouse where Eddie went to school, and Robert Major was the schoolmaster. The lane that you see to the right is the dirt lane that still exists to this day that runs from the Plank farm up to Good Intent. And so when you're visiting there, you can actually drive, and I've driven it. You could walk it and get the experience of what it was like to be a schoolboy in the 1880s, 1890s, going up to the one-room schoolhouse, get a sense of what it was like to be the Plank boys. And today, the Plank farm is now called Plank's Field, and it's a real estate development. Where else would you find real estate developments on farms these days? I think it happens everywhere. I'm a little concerned about how much farmland we're losing to real estate developments, but Plank's Field is kind of an interesting one to go to because there's a lot of baseball nomenclature used for the street names and so on. So it is an interesting place for that reason. Trying to figure out where in the development and along the farm the baseball diamond was that the local people played at. I'm not quite sure where it was, and maybe it moved around year after year. But the Good Intent team came to the Plank farm to play, and of course the Plank boys practiced a lot there as well. So it was much more than just Eddie. He also had brothers Ira, Jesse, and Luther, and they all played together on the team. Eddie pitched and played the outfield, and I believe Luther was his first catcher. And so at around age 20, Eddie and his schoolmaster, Robert Major, started a team that was going to travel around the county called the Good Intent team. And they did with quite interesting results. And over time, the Gettysburg, of course, the town had a team. I'm not quite sure who sponsored it in a given year, but they also organized a ball team. And Eddie sort of graduates from the Good Intent team to the Gettysburg team. One of the interesting historic games was in 1899, which was the championship between Gettysburg, the town team, and McSherry's town, which is east of Gettysburg. 1899, now Eddie's 23 going on 24, so he's already a full-grown young man, and he's a pitcher pitching for Gettysburg against McSherry's town. And this is one of the most outstanding pitching performances of the era back then. And they won 16-0. And Eddie struck out 16 batters. And there was an interesting write-up about Eddie in the newspaper. A lot of my book and Heller's book does get into the local newspaper accounts. And there's quite a few more great games by Eddie and his brothers in the early days. But this one's noteworthy. Of the 29 batsmen who faced Plank, only one reached third base, only two reached second. 3 hits, 2 of which were scratches, were all the home club secured. There was only 1 fly to the outfield. 16 of the 29 were retired on strikes. 1 was given his base on balls, 1 was hit by a pitched ball, and the remainder were retired by the infielders, with the exception of 1 fly to the outfield. This game was also reported across southeastern Pennsylvania. It may have been noted by Connie Mack and others at the professional level. Of course, at that time, the American League didn't exist yet. Gettysburg College, there was an effort to get Eddie involved, the baseball team at the college. It must be made clear, though, that Eddie was never a student of Gettysburg College. He was a farm boy. He went to the one-room schoolhouse. He was not very well educated. In fact, when he was attending the one-room schoolhouse, it was as a late teen, not in his earlier years. He was going with younger students. So Eddie was always a little maybe behind in his schooling, or was a bit older than the other people he was interacting with. And so he goes to the prep school, a grammar school on the grounds of Gettysburg College, which was trying to get his grades up, get him ready to attend the college. Although talking to the grandson, he pretty much said Eddie was not going to go to college. He was there to play baseball. So that kind of makes sense to me, especially knowing that Eddie Plank's first nickname was Farmer Plank. And not saying that farmers aren't bright people. I'm one myself. I have a farm here near Boiling Springs. I'm just saying that he led a rural life and was not into the books as a kid. He was doing a lot of work around the farm, and he was also enjoying playing baseball and also hunting and other things that he did around the area. So he does get into on the college team. He performs exceptionally well. He pitched the 1900 and 1901 seasons. So early 1901, he's still on the college team. He's pitching against Susquehanna University, Penn State, which wasn't called Penn State at the time. I think it was the Pennsylvania Normal School. He pitched against Bucknell, but he never faced Mathewson. There's accounts later in the newspapers that surmise that the college boys, Plank and Mathewson, must have faced each other back in their college days. In fact, some of the mythical accounts about these guys when they're pitching in the World Series later on is that they did face each other. In fact, they did not. So that was all made up. Of course, Dickinson College nearby, the Carlisle Indian School. He also did go against Chief Bender's teams, the Carlisle Indian School, but he never faced him on the mound. And of course, there were others that he played against at the college level. So the college team, he's now 25 going on 26, and he's playing college ball. So think about that compared to today. Usually your college players are between about 18 and 22. So he's a little bit older. And he had a coach briefly, Frank Foreman, nicknamed Monkey. I can't tell you how he ever got the nickname Monkey Foreman, but I love that as a nickname. His brother, Brownie Foreman. Both of them were connected to Mac, knew Mac, or had played for Mac or with Mac at different times. And down in Baltimore, Monkey Foreman through Brownie Foreman discusses Eddie Plank with Connie Mack, and Connie Mack decides he needs another pitcher for his newly found Philadelphia Athletics, and he signs Eddie. He has him try out in Baltimore because that's where the team is, and Eddie's not too far from Baltimore if he's in Gettysburg. So he comes down on a train, tries out, and he's signed to a contract. So now he's going on 26 years old, and now he's in the American League in 1901, fresh out of the college team. Connie Mack, you all probably know an awful lot about him, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on him. But an amazing figure in baseball history. The 5 world championships. I would say the Philadelphia Athletics were the Yankees before the Yankees became good. And so that very early era, the beginning of the American League, the A's were fairly dominant. And a lot of that has to do with Mack and his management and general management as well. So as a rookie in 1901, their home games are played at Columbia Park, which no longer exists, and the A's finished 4th. This was the first year of the American League. Eddie had a respectable season at 17-13, and he led the league in wild pitches. 1902, they win the pennant, and Eddie is a 20-game winner. There was no World Series in 1902 because Pittsburgh refused to play one. I guess the National League was still too proud. At this time, Lave Cross was the team captain. Sox Siebold was the top hitter on the team. And a gentleman named Rube Waddell, one of my favorite players of all time, was also on this team and had a better season than Eddie. You could say Rube was the ace. Eddie might have been the second or third starter. 03 and 04, Eddie has really good seasons. And the A's finished 2nd and then 5th. So they don't win a pennant. Waddell, also a fairly good season in 3 and 4. Chief Bender's a rookie with 17 wins in 1903, but only 10 wins in 1904. The team really struggled to hit. Of course, again, dead ball era. And this is when Harry Davis becomes a first baseman, later the team captain. 1905 is when things start to go really well for Plank, Mack, and the A's. So Eddie now is putting up a really good ERA, wins twice as many games as he loses, and the A's win the pennant. Waddell, 27 wins, 10 losses, 1.48 ERA. That looks a lot like Steve Carlton in 1972. But there was a bizarre incident with a straw hat prank on the train during the World Series, or in September before the World Series, and Waddell was injured. And so he did not pitch for a while there because of that. And then facing McGraw's Giants in the World Series, the Giants that year had won 105 games and had an amazing season. And Matheson, 31-9, 1.28, just stunning statistics, even in the dead ball era. Of course, the Giants win that World Series. And do want to note, Christy Matheson, if you've never been to his grave, he is buried north of Harrisburg at a town called Lewisburg, where Bucknell University is. In fact, he's a short walk from Bucknell University there in Lewisburg. It's a very nice grave, very peaceful cemetery to visit if you're ever heading up that way towards Williamsport. The 6, 7, 8, and 9 teams were competitive teams. They went to a new park in 1909, Shibe Park. In that year, they won 95 games, but lost the pennant to Ty Cobb's Tigers. And during this time, Harry Davis becomes the team captain. And during this time, Mack puts together his $100,000 infield, which today, $100,000 might not get you an inning with these guys. But Eddie Collins at second, Jack Barry at short, Frank Home Run Baker at third, and Stuffy McGinnis, who would later play at first base for Davis. 1910, 1911, this is when the A's really reign over the American League. They really dominated. Of course, you have your $100,000 infield. You also have some dominant pitching. Jack Coombs is now in the mix, putting up Matheson-like numbers. Chief Bender winning over 20 games. At this time in 1910, Eddie has a bit of a sore arm, goes 16-10, still contributes. And they beat the Cubs in the World Series 4-1. 1911, Eddie's feeling a little better, 23-8. Coombs still fairly dominant. And you can see the batting averages of the $100,000 infield. That's the year Collins hits 365. Eddie won game 1 of the 1911 World Series versus Rube Marquard, but he lost game 5 in relief. The A's beat the Giants 4-2. A little note about the baseball card. So it's around this time that the American Tobacco Company puts out what is now known as the T206 series. And the Eddie Plank card is one of the rarest cards of all baseball cards. So if you're a collector, you know this. Of course, the Honus Wagner card in this set is by far the most valuable. There was a dispute with Wagner and cigarettes, as I understand, that Wagner did not want to promote that or be involved with that. It's not known exactly why Plank is not represented in the deck of cards as much as the average player. The Plank card is very rare. It's thought there's some rumor that maybe it was something with printing plates. Of course, if that was the case, then there would be other cards that would be rare. Possibly the card was pulled for similar reasons to Wagner. In my experiences, interviewing the grandson and looking through all the different records and things, Eddie Plank was a pretty clean guy. He didn't drink and he didn't smoke that I could tell, and very quiet, unassuming gentleman. And he just might not have wanted to be involved in such advertising or promotion. So it's more likely that Eddie was right there with Wagner and the reason why not to be in the deck. Of course, that card today valued over $50,000. I wish I had a few of those. 1912, Boston ran away with the pennant. The A's finished third. Harry Davis is gone. Danny Murphy's now the team captain. Eddie had perhaps his best season. He was the best pitcher on the team now. He's age 36, 37. However, he is starting to think about retirement. He has started to see a young lady back home. So some interactions there. But he's convinced to come back for 1913, and it's good that he does. So in his age 37, 38 season, yeah, he does slip a bit down to 18-10. The A's do win the pennant. They face the Giants again in the World Series. And Plank versus Matheson occurs in game 2. And this is probably around the time that there's all this talk about how these two faced each other, 20 years ago. I guess it was about 15 years ago in college. Again, that never happened, but it is in the papers at this time where they talk about these college boys facing each other. So Eddie beats Matheson in game 5, 3-1. And in one of the more remarkable endings to a World Series, he's at the Polo Grounds as a visiting player. And of course, he's on the mound pitching a complete game, gets the final out for the home Giants are batting. So he records the final out as a visiting pitcher in the bottom of the 9th. And after that, the crowd comes on the field and they carry Eddie Plank off the field. Now, I know from what I've researched that a lot of fans came up on the train in New York, and I'm guessing these are Philadelphia fans that were in the stands that carried Eddie off the field. I can't imagine that these were New York fans that were celebrating Eddie's accomplishment. So he is carried off the field at the visiting park, which is quite remarkable. And then big parties in Philadelphia and Gettysburg, and there's a lot of local documentation about the Gettysburg party. And all the guys that came to town and all the toasts that were made. 1914 is a little bit of a down year. They do win the pennant, the A's. Eddie's now the oldest player in the American League, age 38, 39. He has a losing record, though, and he has a sore arm at times. Like I said, the A's win the pennant, but they lose to the Boston Braves in 4 games. And Eddie did pitch a game. He lost 1-0. After the season, Connie Mack releases Plank, Bender, and Coombs. Imagine releasing almost your entire pitching staff, your starting rotation, after winning a pennant. But these gentlemen were getting older, and I think Mac had other plans for what he wanted to do with his money, so he was cashing in. He also soon thereafter sold off his $100,000 infield. I bet you he got more than $100,000 for it. I didn't add it up. Maybe one of you knows. So now Eddie is a free agent. He's no longer pitching for the A's. He's 39 years old in the off season, and he's offered a lot of money to sign with the new Federal League. I'm not sure how the Federal League draft worked, but he ends up on the St. Louis Terriers under Fielder Jones. So Eddie's now off to St. Louis, and Jones predicts that the St. Louis Terriers are going to win the pennant back in April. Eddie has a pretty good season at 21-11. Again, he's 39-40. And it's interesting to look at those statistics compared to his prior seasons. And you can probably guess the Federal League, while a competitive league, might have been somewhere between or slightly weaker than a major league based on Eddie's performance, or maybe Eddie was just feeling good. The Terriers, though, they have a great season. They finished second by percentage points. And there was no playoff. They were tied in games behind, but they lost on percentage points. It was kind of strange to see that. And there was probably a game or two that could have been made up to make the difference. So Fielder Jones predicting back in April that they were going to win the pennant, he was off by a hair. 1916, 1970 now, Eddie is in his early 40s. And when the Federal League folded, the Browns got the rights to him. So he goes to the St. Louis Browns. 1916, he's aged 41. He does have a winning record, 16-15 for a mediocre team. So now you see him back in the major leagues. The ERA is similar. Yeah, the winning and losing record is a little worse, but he's on a much, much weaker team in the Browns compared to, I forget what the record was, but it was a losing record. So perhaps the Federal League was a pretty strong league when you compare it to how he performs the next year back in the American League. It's at this time that he marries Anna Cora Myers, the young lady he had been seeing from Oxford, a little village northeast of Gettysburg. And during this time, after his marriage, Eddie Plank II, the son, was born. So Eddie Plank becomes a father in his early 40s. So he's fairly old to be, a father of a newborn. But that's his life. And during his long breaks on the road, so he would visit home. So he would, if he knew the team was headed to Philadelphia or Baltimore, he would get permission to come back home and spend time with his wife and newborn son. And then come and, when it's his turn in the rotation, he'd show up and do that. And it's interesting. One of these times he almost didn't make it. So there's a story in my book about Eddie, who loved automobiles, and a lot of these ball players back then did. So he had to get to the train in Harrisburg. I believe he had to get to Philadelphia or maybe back to St. Louis. Somehow he had to get to the train station in Harrisburg, and he was driving his car up the Gettysburg Road, which is today Route 15. Although back then it was just a 2-lane road, probably mostly a dirt road or gravel road. And he comes to a place called Rose Garden, which was one of the train stops. And there's a bridge over a creek there. So you got to go under the railroad bridge, under the arch, to continue on the road. However, it was flooded, so the road was blocked. So instead of turning around and giving up, Eddie throttles his car. He's driving alone now. He goes off the road, up a little hill, over the embankment, up to the railroad tracks, and his car gets stuck. So this is like one of those silent movies. Imagine this Model T-like car, and I'm sure it wasn't a Model T. It was one of the more expensive Buicks or something of the time. He gets stuck on the railroad tracks, and a train is coming. And Eddie had made a comment that he really thought his life was over, and what a strange way to go. He gets out of his car. He pushes it off the tracks, manages to hop into it while it's rolling down the other side, and continue on his way, and narrowly escape getting run over by a train. So one of the more exciting moments in Eddie's late career. It's funny now to look back, and I actually went to the spot where this happened just to try to understand, what it looks like there. And it's a bit of a steep hill. He had to go up and down, and how he managed to catch up and hop in that car while it was going down the other side, we'll never know, but he managed to do it. So 1917 is his last year in the major leagues, and he does not play the entire season. He's 5-6 with a very solid ERA in 1917 when he suddenly retires. Now, he had just lost 1-0 to Walter Johnson. I think it was in 11 innings, and his arm was throbbing. In fact, it was almost bringing him to tears how much his arm hurt. And he told Fielder Jones this, who was now the manager of the Browns, and he quit. He said, "I'm heading home." However, also at this time, there were race riots in St. Louis, and it could also be that Eddie was just like, "I'm on a losing team again. My arm hurts. It's crazy around here. I just want to be home." So Eddie Plank retires from the major leagues. He walks away after losing 1-0 to Walter Johnson. Fielder Jones tries to get him back for 1918, but Eddie does not report. He declines. He was then traded to the New York Yankees, but he did not report. He did not want to play for the Yankees. So for 1918, Eddie signs with Steelton in the Industrial League. So this is during World War I, and a lot of players who were avoiding the draft went to work, in quotes, with these industrial teams, mostly for entertainment. Of course, Eddie, I believe, was probably beyond draft age, and because of his marital status, I don't think he was in jeopardy. I think he just wanted to play nearby, near home. And so Steelton, which is not far from Harrisburg, it's on the east shore of the Susquehanna River, just south of Harrisburg. It's a pretty short drive for him, as long as he doesn't have to run away from any trains. So this was it at age 42. There's some accounts of these games. Of course, he does very well. Chief Bender's in this league, as are several other former major leaguers. So that's it for Eddie Plank as a ball player. He then retires for good. He doesn't play again after that, although there is talk, people trying to get him to come back. But instead, he enjoys hunting and fishing, spending time with family. He and his brother Ira started an auto dealership in Gettysburg. The building still stands, and there's a sign in front of it that you can locate where that was or where that is. He's also known to umpire local games. His good friend Eddie Collins would come to town. The two would go hunting. He also would give Gettysburg battlefield tours to friends. He has a few years of all this enjoyment, and his boy, I don't think, is even quite 10 years old. And you can see a picture here. Picture is probably within a year, maybe even months, of Eddie passing. Eddie complained of some pain on his left side, and one day had a stroke that inhibited his left arm, his left leg. He was paralyzed. Interesting that the greatest left-hander in Philadelphia history could no longer use his left arm as he's laying on the bed, his deathbed. He passed away, and Connie Mack said, "I've lost a son." It really affected Connie greatly. Connie and Eddie had a pretty good relationship over Eddie's career. And it was tense at times when they were negotiating contracts, but otherwise very much like a father and son relationship. Of course, many people came to Eddie Plank's funeral, a lot of former athletics and some officials. It was a very large service, but a very small graveside service. And he was buried in Evergreen Cemetery next to the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Of course, Eddie is later inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1946. In Gettysburg, there are some historic markers around that you can find, but probably the best place if you want to get a sense of Gettysburg and Eddie Plank is to go to the restaurant Gettysburg Eddie's, and they have a lot of very large old photographs of Eddie Plank there. And this is a sports bar that honors him. Of course, one of the reasons I wrote the book is Eddie Plank III was one of the co-owners of Gettysburg Eddie's at its start. And I know the owner, Bill Wills, he recently sold the business. And as I got to know these guys, Bill had the book stocked at the restaurant, and it continues to be for sale there to this day. So it sells very well out of that one restaurant and other places around Gettysburg. But if you're looking for a place to stop, that's a really nice baseball-oriented sports bar. It's a great respite, especially if you're up in the area for other reasons, maybe to get into the Civil War and learn that history. Don't forget about Eddie Plank. Just a plug on some of our other books. Sunbury Press has a lot of history books. I won't go into all the details. These are some of the ones that I'm a co-author of, but yeah, we have over 1,000 titles. If you are interested in checking us out, www.sunburypress.com. We have a wonderful e-commerce site you can see there. If you want to reach out to me directly, that's my email address, lknorr@sunburypress.com. Always happy to interact, especially about baseball. All right.
All right, Lawrence, thank you very much. Very interesting. Couple questions I have here. You said he retired and went to play for Steelton. I know at the time there was a mandate from the government that ball players either had to join the service or join an industry that was supporting the war effort. It sounds like Steelton sounds like a steel town, and so
Yeah.
it was an industrial league. Besides playing ball, I mean, did he? I assume he was taking a job someplace, working.
No.
Or he was only playing ball?
Yeah, he had a farm. He took over his father's farm north of Gettysburg, and there was talk of him possibly running for office, which he did not do. No, he did not work at the steel mill. And in fact, I think at 42, 43 years old that year, and his marital status, I don't think he would have had to serve in the military. I think he did it to play ball.
Okay.
That's my thought. But yeah, you're right. Many players, maybe younger players, to avoid service in World War I, played in these kinds of leagues.
Right, and of course, there were other ways of serving besides
Sure.
working for industrial businesses. Certainly, agricultural. So supporting the food supply and whatever was.
I think what I saw is some of the wealthy industrialists, really, big baseball fans, wanted to put together teams and compete, and so there was some of that going on too, where baseball being very popular and really helping with morale for the workforce. And so I mean, you could look at it like having Eddie Plank come and pitch for the team is also being somewhat patriotic in some ways.
Right. You mentioned he took over his father's farm. What were his off seasons like? Was he a farmer in off season, or how was he spending that time?
I'd say he one thing he did was he didn't spend money much. So he loaned a lot of money out. And this is one of the things that's a little different about my book versus Heller's book. Heller's very good at the baseball narrative and the baseball career, especially the major league stuff. I got into a lot of the probably minuscule stuff that might not be interesting to anybody, but local people around the Gettysburg area. But he'd go out and loan money to help people. And so he had a sort of a running list of who he lent money to, and often he forgave those loans. So he realized at the level he was earning, he was much better off than a lot of his neighbors and relatives. So he was all about helping people. He owned the farm, but I don't know that he worked it much. I think he had some help to do that. He really liked to go hunting, and they had a cabin in Maryland on some hunting grounds. He loved to fish. So a lot of it was more those outdoor sports. He and his brothers had a bowling tournament. They also had a big clam bake where they invited a lot of people in from out of town. So, it was a fairly short off season of a few months, and then they were off to someplace in the South, sometimes to Cuba, to train.
Okay. I think the most surprising thing I learned today was how old he was when he got to the major leagues. I think these days, players tend to last longer, but if you look at a lot of the players in the early days, by the time they were reaching 30, 31, 32, they had peaked and were soon on their way out. Yeah. And here he is early in his career. So, that was a big surprise, pitching all the way into his 40s.
It's almost like put Jamie Moyer back in the dead ball era. That's how I've thought about him. And he starts late. He's in the one-room schoolhouse as a student, kind of late. He's attending the grammar school very late. He's probably the oldest student there. And I think that's all about playing baseball, not about book learning. But yeah, he does seem to be maybe 5 years off in his life schedule. But, he achieves great things once he's in the major leagues, and he lasts into his 40s, which a lot of guys, it seems like only the Hall of Famers do that. Although there might be a few exceptions to that.
Right. That's a big surprise. What was the most surprising thing that you learned during this process? Of writing this book, most interesting or surprising fact about or facet of his life.
I really liked researching the local games from the local papers and just finding out as a late teenager, maybe right around 2021, just how impactful he was in the sport locally. So that was interesting to me. I also loved connecting him with families in the area and understanding, well, who were the guys that played with Eddie Plank before he was famous? And so that was fun. But I think what really stood out, to answer your question about, what was most remarkable, I think it was his character. While there was no other long interview or lots of long letters by him, I don't think he was very literate. I think he was, literate, but I don't think he was like, someone who's going to write a book. And nobody really interviewed him at length. So you have to kind of piece together who he was from the scant evidence that there is. And even the grandson never knew him because he died long before the grandson was born. And there just isn't a lot of great information, but you can put together from what other people said about him and from some of the evidence of his activities that he was a very generous person. He was a Mason. He was just an upstanding member of the community, very clean living. He was never getting in trouble anywhere. I mean, he's not Rube Waddell, by any stretch, and highly respected. Especially Ty Cobb had a lot of great things to say about him. So a real gentleman, and the kind of guy you'd want to sit down and talk to. You might be bored talking to him because he might not, want to talk about himself, unlike a lot of other people these days. So very modest. And, as I think Connie Mack said it all, he felt like he had lost a son.
Right. And you mentioned he was, didn't smoke, didn't drink. Some of the things you're saying here seem to be hardworking, stoic type. Is this all a product of his upbringing? With a name like Plank, I guess that sounds like a German name.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about his early years being brought up and what kind of an environment and atmosphere?
Yeah. So definitely a Pennsylvania Dutch farming family. Think about back in those days, before all the technology, before all the seeds that had a guaranteed, crop yield, that kind of thing. And of course, then you have the Civil War coming through, affecting the family before he was born. So I think they might have been affected financially somewhat by that. So, it was a pretty hard life in farming, and a lot of farmers might be asset rich but cash poor. That's probably still true today. So the emphasis was on farm life, farm work. While Eddie Plank is not Amish or Mennonite or living that kind of devout life, sort of like others over in Lancaster, Lebanon County might be, he's more of your Lutheran, Reformed, Pennsylvania Dutch, hardworking, modest, save their money, go to church, and it's not exciting. It's very much a middle class to lower middle class life, I think, that he had as a boy. But I think they had a lot of fun. I think the outdoor activities and things that he partook in, it was a good life.
All right, great. I'm going to open it up for some questions from the audience. Walt Cherniak, one of our regular viewers, is first up there. Go ahead, Walt.
Thanks, Pete. A couple of things. First, speculation on why his career might have gotten off to, it took him to 24 to really get noticed. There was only one major league in 1899. It was the creation of the American League in 1901 obviously had a huge impact on his career path. But really, it was just the National League in the late 1890s, so there weren't as many jobs for major league players. But my question is about Connie Mack. You mentioned when Plank passed that Mack said he felt he'd lost his son. Was there any vitriol at all between Eddie Plank and Mack when it wasn't a popular thing? I know he was very old at the time for a player, but when he went to play in the Federal League, Connie Mack probably wasn't real thrilled about that. I was wondering if that affected their relationship.
I don't think, it wasn't so much then. I think the vitriol was a little bit before that. So after the 1913 World Series, if I'm recalling, and it's been a few years since I wrote the book, but he releases Plank before he goes to the Federal Leagues. And it seemed like Mack is essentially destroying his team. I think the team the following year, the 1915 A's, I think are pretty bad. One of the worst teams,
sure.
Right?
After they were swept in the World Series by the Braves, Mack basically sold everyone off.
Yeah. So I think, he's not just, having a problem with Plank at that point. I think the contract negotiations every year between Plank and Mack, they sort of escalate over time. And after the 13 World Series, I think Eddie wants to be paid. And I think there's a time where they don't come to terms for quite a while. And there's a question of whether Eddie's going to show up and actually go to spring training. Of course, they do come to terms, and Eddie does make some more money, and they get. But I read that many times Eddie would sit on the train next to Connie Mack. So when they would travel, and they were very close throughout most of Eddie's career. So very friendly. Plank really respected Connie Mack, and I think likewise Connie Mack realized the good character of Eddie Plank. Some of the other players on the A's not as well behaved, as you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also interesting to note that Mac was obviously not only his manager, but the owner of the team. So,
yeah, I do agree with you. The opportunity of the American League. I also think, though, he probably could have been signed by a National League team if I think it was the notoriety he got pitching for Gettysburg College, because that then gets reported more widely. And he's pitching very well at the college level. So, yeah, and that coupled with, hey, there's a new league. We need arms and bats. So, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, maybe you can clarify one point for me. Earlier in the presentation, might just be what I heard. I thought you kind of made a point that he was not pitching for Gettysburg College. He was pitching for the prep school.
No, he was. He never attended the college. He pitched for the college, but was not a college student. That there's a lot of things written about Eddie Plank where it's just assumed because he pitched for Gettysburg College that he was enrolled as a student at Gettysburg College. And I believe these days, obviously, there's rules about that. You have to be enrolled. So Eddie later on is assumed to be a college student, like this bright college boy like Matheson, and he's not. He's a farmer who very late developing academically, we'll say, and he's in a grammar school, a prep school that's on the campus of Gettysburg College, where some students went to get ready to attend college. So they had to essentially get their skills up to qualify to be accepted into the college, but they allowed them to play sports on the college teams if they were enrolled in that prep school. And that's how he got on it. And, he wasn't there long. I don't even think he played 2 baseball seasons for Gettysburg College, but he did not attend the prep school for those entire 2 years. I think he shows up at the prep school just in time for baseball season. And then he's signed by the A's right out of college a little more than a year later. So he probably doesn't have a whole lot of credits at the prep school either.
All right, that's a great distinction.
That makes sense.
I appreciate you making it. It's funny that things have changed these days where you actually have to be taking classes to pitch for a team.
Right.
I know back in those days, Eddie Collins was a college boy and was held up to some amount of ridicule. I guess the college boys weren't as well accepted by their teammates because they were much more the exception and the anomaly. And I guess there's probably some level of class distinction and not warfare, but
well, baseball as a profession back then wasn't really seen as always an honorable thing for young men to do. I mean, there were better careers, right? Especially if you were a college boy, you were probably off into industry somewhere running some enterprise. So, yeah. Most guys did not make a lot of money in baseball. Eddie Plank ended up doing fairly well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, given that he was making most of his career with Connie Mack, who wasn't necessarily known as the most generous of owners there. We did have one question okay, Tom, go ahead.
I'm curious as to what was his pitching arsenal. Of course, dead ball era, did everybody threw spitballs and shine balls and all that stuff? Was he noted for any one particular pitch?
He was noted more for his motion, which was more of a not quite sidearm, but like 3/4, and he'd buggy whip across. So he, think of him as throwing across his body. And so, yeah, he did have a variety of pitches. I don't know if you'd call it a slider back then, but probably had in his arsenal a decent curveball and a fastball at a minimum. And I'm sure he changed speeds. He was known as a pitcher. not someone who just relied on power.
Okay.
So we had a question in the chat box, not quite related to Eddie, but more about your business. You mentioned that the Sunbury Press has many titles, and including a number of baseball titles. Besides the Eddie Plank book, what are some of your other baseball titles?
Well, we just released a book by Harry Dietz called Covey. That's about Stan Kovaleski. And we also released one called Dead Ball Trailblazers, which is about a number of record holders during the dead ball era. Some of the records still stands, some of them were broken. I really like that book by Ronald Waldo. It reminds me of the Ritter book. He did a great job with that. And the Covey book, there had never been a biography of Stan Kovaleski. And beyond that, there's several others. I think we have 15 or 20 different baseball titles. We just did one on Gabe Paul. If you're interested in reading about general management, that's there. There's a book on lady owners. I'm drawing a blank, but you can go to sunburypress.com, just search on baseball, and a bunch of them will come up. When I was set up at SABR, I filled the table with different books. And I know, Pete, you were there. I probably brought 20 different titles with me. I think we might have a few more than that, 25, 30 at this point.
I have a question in the chat, but Paul, do you just want to go ahead and ask that yourself?
Hi, Larry. Nice to see you. I was sitting at the McFarland table with Gary Mitchum
Okay.
on Saturday. I presented my book on Joe Cambria on Saturday. I'm always interested in where folks do research and places like that. I know you got Ancestry and genealogy and newspapers.com and stuff like that. Where else did you find research where you went looking?
Well, a lot of of course, the baseball statistics and box scores and all that you can get on Baseball Reference and other places. But
Yeah.
with Eddie Plank, the Adams County Historical Society was very helpful. So
Great.
you had to get there. A lot of that stuff isn't digitized. So getting into the Plank family folders and the old baseball accounts, Gettysburg College as well. So that was a great resource. Also, I happened to, by knowing the grandson, had some never before published or never before seen photos and accounts and things. There was some unpublished. It was a very brief biography that the son had written about his father, and there was a local lady whose father or grandfather, I think it was her father, had played with Eddie Plank and wrote about the Good Intent team. So, the major league stuff pretty well documented. The Philadelphia papers were very helpful. They go into depth about the team and Mac and so on. Of course, they have a Philadelphia slant to them, but you have to. Biography's tough, especially when there's no diary or journal, or the guy's not a letter writer, so you really have to dig.
Yeah. It's always interesting to find stuff.
Yeah.
It's like searching for Easter eggs. Nice book. I'm going to get it soon. No
All
problem.
right. Thank you.
So Lawrence, we were discussing earlier, before the meeting started, you have a long time career in IT and also are doing the publishing. How did you get into the publishing business? How did that come about?
Yeah, I wanted to do a family history. My grandparents had been married for like 70 years, and I thought that was amazing. And they had big families. And so I put together, using Ancestry and other sources, a pretty big family history. And I wanted to get it printed and published out to the family. There's a lot of relatives. And being an entrepreneur, I didn't want to pay anybody to do it. And I thought, well, my sister is a graphic designer. My brother-in-law works for a printer. I've got the book. We'll just work together. And so I had the books printed myself. And to do so, I decided, well, I want to be able to write this off. So I'm going to start a little company. I had a number of different business interests and things I had done. And so I created Sunbury Press, and I had to decide on a name. And a lot of the relations were up in the Montongo Valley, which is northern Dauphin, western Schuylkill County, some of Northumberland County all comes together there. And north of there was Sunbury and Shamokin. I thought Sunbury Press versus Shamokin Press. And Sunbury Press just sounded a whole lot better. So that's the name. So one book about my family, I actually started a company. It sounds crazy to do so, but there were other, like I wanted to do my mother's side, and then some other books about family history. Then I started bringing in other authors, and it just grew from there. I love doing it. Of course, around 2010, there's a big change where we go more into print on demand, and using some of the IT knowledge that I had about networks and distribution and content management. The press really grew from that point. And now, like I said, pretty good sized independent press. We have 10 employees and publish a lot of books, and growing.
Right. Sounds like a great success story.
So
I want to be
far,
mindful of your time. I know you said you had a time limit. You have something else coming up. So I guess let me just throw this out here on your way out. What's next for you? I know you mentioned you're working on your PhD, but from any baseball books and additional baseball books in the future, or what's coming down the road?
well, I know that Harry Dietz is going to be doing a book on Jake Daubert. So he's working on that. As far as me, my focus, is really going to be, I got to keep the press running and growing. And I'm going to focus on my PhD, which is actually about Civil War era medical history. Has nothing to do with baseball. But I really want to get back to writing baseball biography, especially. And at this point, no plan for me specifically, but Ted Knorr has talked to me about Rap Dixon not having enough information out there about him. So he and I are talking about that. So you might see something where Ted Knorr and Lawrence Knorr actually collaborate, even though we don't think we're related, just have the same last name. Might be a book on Rap Dixon in the next year that might have my name on it. So
the Knorr brothers, right?
there you go. There you go. I do have to go. I have a podcast I'm about to host. So
Just one quick thing before
Yep.
you leave. If you're doing Civil War medicine, you'll obviously be coming to Frederick,
yes,
the Civil War history place.
Yep.
And right next door to it, there's a wonderful Italian restaurant with really, really great gelato and great sandwiches. So there's your place for lunch.
you might have something to do with that.
No, I wish I did. It's a good,
Okay.
it's a really, really nice place. It's called.
Yeah, I'll be probably down there quite a bit. I'll be checking that out very soon.
It's called Delizia.
Delizia.
Right next, and the reason why I say it is because right next to it's like 2 doors down from the Civil War
Excellent.
Medical Museum. So great place to go hang out. Hopefully see you in Frederick.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It was great being here.
Lawrence,
Appreciate
thanks
the
for your
opportunity.
time. We really appreciate your making time for us, and it was a great presentation. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Good day.
All right, folks. Anyone else have any last comments for the meeting? If not, mentioned our next meeting is Saturday, October 1st, with a speaker to be announced soon. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks for taking some time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Happy Labor